Hey guys, I'm Chalena,
And I'm Courtney.
and this is Mysteries at the Coffee Shop. So, as you can see, Courtney is back from her little break. She'll be here for a little bit and she'll be working on the next episode with me. This episode is a blind listen for her, so she actually doesn't know what it's about. Never heard of any of these things. So, with that being said, let's get into it. This is episode 11, The Rake versus the White Bluff Screamer. So, what I found interesting about these two essentially urban legends is that they were kind of created the same way. So, if you look up the definition of an urban legend is defined as a story about an unusual or humorous event that people believe to be true but is not true. So, we're going to go over those two. The Rake is a cryptid that was created in 2005 on 4chan, and then the other one is called the White Bluff Screamer, and it can be found in the hollows of White Bluff, Tennessee. Yeah, so like right up there near your neck of the woods, upper Tennessee. This is like a town like right out of Nashville, like right outside of Nashville. And honestly, like they say that the people who live there, they're like pretty chill about it. They're just like, yeah, that's the White Bluff Screamer out there screaming in the woods.
Scary.
It is pretty scary, and I will say it, yeah, it does get a little bit spooky, so let's get into that. The White Bluff Screamer is kind of like, it's not really well known, actually. Like, not a lot of people heard about it, and I find that really interesting, just because, like, the town is, like, they're so nonchalant about it.
Yeah, I didn't
right?
know
They're not,
anything.
right, yeah, they're super nonchalant about it. They're just like, oh, yeah, the White Bluff Screamer. But there are a handful of stories and legends surrounding the Screamer, but the most well-known legend surrounds a family in the 1920s. They had moved to White Bluff for fresh air and more room for their expanding family. Their family consisted of a dad, a mom, and like 7 little children, okay? So they needed more space. Their family was expanding. They wanted a new, fresh start. I don't know their life before moving to White Bluff, but they pulled up to this town and they found a little hollow next to a stream, like a water source. And if you don't know what a hollow is, it's like a little valley that's protected by all the trees and shrubbery. It was just like this cool little secret place on the outside of the forest that they're like, this is a great place to start over. This place is beautiful. It's a little, magical for the kids. It's great. Or so they thought. So they started to notice strange going-ons and things happening around the farm. Like just weird little things. You're like, oh, why did this disappear? Or, oh, why is that over there? Just little things that like you can kind of ignore and be like, oh, well, maybe it was my brother or the child or the cat or whatever. But one night, they begin to hear this ungodly screaming. Like, sounds like something's out there dying in the woods. It scared the ever-living fuck out of them. It chilled them to their bones. And then the children every night were fucking terrified. So from that night forward, every single night, like clockwork, you would hear the screaming. Every single night. Can you imagine how frustrating and obnoxious that is?
Yeah.
So one night, the dad, he snaps. He's like, I'm fucking over this. How dare you terrify my family and my children? We worked so hard to get to this point. Whatever this is out there screaming, scaring my family, I'm done. It's over. So he grabs his gun and marches out to the woods. And he's out there screaming like, show yourself. I'm tired of this shit. He rounds the corner of his property and his stomach fucking drops. Because as he walked around the corner, he saw that there was not one, but a fucking horde of screamers.
Is you gonna describe them? Because most of the time around this area, they hear screaming, and most people think like bobcats and stuff. So I'm excited to see where this goes.
Well, he didn't describe them. So basically, What happened was he rounded the corner, right? And he heard a scream, and then another scream, and another scream, until he was all surrounded by just screaming.
Oh,
no. So he didn't describe them.
Okay.
So this, he was like, oh shit, there's multiple, and he left his family there unprotected. So he drops everything and runs back to the house, and as soon as that door opened, all the blood left his face and his body. His soul left his body. He opened that door and there was nothing but a bloodbath. There was bits of flesh and body parts and blood scattered all around the house. Bits of flesh were hanging from the walls and the ceiling. His family had been torn to fucking shreds.
Oh my gosh.
They were unrecognizable. And then, you know, not much of that's where the story ends. So that is the legend. Now, is there proof that this actually happened? No, but that's the legend.
Wow. Do you know if, like, locals now chalk it up to, like, bobcats and stuff like that, or?
Not necessarily. So the funny thing about the White Bluff Screamer is that no one can actually tell you what it looks like.
Wow.
That's the crazy part. So, you know, that's the story I told you is the main story. When I was a teenager in high school, I ran into this story online because I was in class and I was bored. Okay, so I was like, yeah, let's look up spooky stories. So I came across one about the White Bluff Screamer, and this one scared the ever-living shit out of me.
Yeah.
I was like 15 years old, right? So I'm reading the story about a man who lost his prized champion hunting dog. And this was like a 10 out of 10 pure blood, like champion line bloodhound that was as fierce as it was fast. It was top of the line hunting dog. It was not scared of anything. And it had ran out in the woods while he was hunting. So he had two dogs with him. One of them runs off, right? And he's like, that's weird. She normally comes back when I call for her. And so he and the other dog track this dog down and they find it torn to shreds. Like unrecognizable. And he was like, this wasn't a bear, this wasn't any animal because none of it was eaten. It looks like it was torn apart just for shits and giggles.
Oh my gosh.
And so he was like, oh fuck. So he runs back home to find all the rest of his dogs torn up. And then it comes for him. And then he doesn't remember anything, but he does not live in the White Bluffs anymore.
Wow. I think
I can't. Right?
Wow.
I can't remember what website it was from. I don't know where I read it, but I blatantly remember that story and it stuck with me, and that's why the White Bluff Screamer is something I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. Now, other versions of the story say that the White Bluff Screamer is actually the White Lady.
Oh, okay. Full circle.
And not like a Caucasian white woman, like a pale woman in a white dress.
Right, yeah. I've heard the lore about the White Lady, so that's interesting that those two maybe connect.
Right. So you know the lore of the White Lady. The story goes the woman came home, found her husband cheating, and in a fit of rage killed her children. And when she realized what she had done, she killed herself. Mm-hmm. So now she's doomed to roam the bluffs screaming over the loss of her children.
Right. And
then some people say that the White Screamer is actually a banshee, you know, forewarning you of death and bad fortune.
Ooh. That's scary.
Yeah, so it's hard to say. And then to this day, no one really knows what the Screamer looks like. Some say it resembles a large wild cat, and others say it's a woman in a white dress, a pale humanoid creature, or even a young girl. The only thing that everyone can agree on is the horrific screaming sound that you can hear every night in the bluffs.
That's so scary.
Isn't it? And the whole town is like chill with it. They're just like, yeah.
Do you have anything that's like maybe the most recent story, or just the locals just don't even care anymore?
So I did find a Reddit post. I was going to put it on here, but I didn't just because he, you know, quote unquote, ran into the White Bluff Screamer, but he's very convinced that was a Wendigo.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's a little interesting. So yeah. I don't actually know. The most recent ones are on Reddit, and I can't say how credible they are.
Right.
But it is interesting that this whole town just agrees that it's there, and that's a normal thing. You don't go into the bluffs at night, by the way. Some people do say that it looks like and resembles a large wildcat, but that just makes me think that it is actually a wildcat.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was putting two together. The only, like, you know, your logical side your brain goes to is, like, especially around this area, if you hear, like, a woman or a child screaming in the woods, it's like a bobcat or a mountain lion.
It sounds very similar. Mm-hmm. Either way, you still don't want to go out in the woods at night because that's like a fuck around and find out you're going to get eaten.
Either way, it's terrifying and dangerous.
Exactly. You don't fuck around with, like, large cats, dude.
Mm-mm. Not at all.
So I just think it's interesting that that one, like, was created before the internet. So that was kind of like word of mouth that,
Yeah.
like, literally has just been going on since the 1920s.
Yeah, that's a long time too. And like, I can imagine it being passed down to generations,
Right? I just think it's kind of cool in comparison to the Rake, which
Okay.
we're going to go over next, where he was created on the internet.
Ooh.
It's kind of like just like the Slender Man episode where we went over that he was just created. Now, the Rake, we're going to head up further up north to New York, Canada, and Maine, where all of that takes place. That's where most of the witnesses say they see him. He was created by multiple users on a website called 4chan in 2005, where somebody anonymous created a thread that said, "Give me ideas for a new cryptid."
Oh. So they wanted to bring something to life.
Yeah, so it was like collaborative. It was like a bunch
Yeah.
of people that were like, "Oh, you should give him 3 eyeballs, you should make him look like this, I think this is scary." Some of the first stories of the Rake were posted on the Something Awful forums, and I know that sounds familiar.
Yes.
That's the same place where the notorious Slender Man was created.
Yep. Mhm.
So, I just think that's cool, and some people say that the Rake is within the Slenderverse.
Okay.
So you hear about him a lot. So what does he look like and what does he do? So many witnesses and victims claim that he's a pale, bald, slender entity with long limbs that either resembles a naked man or a hairless dog.
Gross.
Preferably, I would prefer the latter because the first one really freaking scares me.
Me too.
I do not want to see naked man.
No. Regardless if he's a cryptid or not, don't come at me like that.
Get the fuck away from me.
Yeah.
Anyways, he has long, sharp claws, white eyes that glow in the dark, and some people describe that his jaw can actually unhinge, showing rows and rows of serrated teeth.
I don't like that.
And although he can walk on 2 feet, he prefers to walk on all fours.
Ooh. That gives me chills. Anything coming at you with 4 feet that like can walk on 2 feet, no. Immediate no.
Yeah, I tried to look up why, and there's no, like, real reason other than, like, the creep factor, and,
Yeah,
like, he's just gonna give himself back problems for the
Yeah,
rest of his life.
He just does it to make you crap yourself.
Right? I read that, and I was like, my back hurts just reading that.
Yeah.
Why would you do that? We're gonna get to the scariest part. The scary part isn't his appearance.
Oh no.
The scariest part is that he's said to be very intelligent.
Ooh.
So unlike the White Bluff Screamer, that's more of a primordial, like... It's the White Bluff Screamer is more primordial. It's more animal-like, right?
Yeah.
So this guy is more intelligent. He stalks his victims for days, months, even years, just studying their habits and their schedules. And he's able to speak and psychologically tortures and abuses his victims.
Ooh.
He threatens their families and their personal lives as well. So if you were to come out and say something about him, say that he's real, he will go and massacre your whole family.
That's so
And
scary.
he'll massacre them the same way the White Bluff Screamer massacred that family back in the 1920s. So their method of killing is about the same, except the Rake is a little bit more logical about it.
Yeah. He plans it. It seems like
Yeah.
that's scary.
Yeah, that's the scary part, is he plans it.
Yeah, that's terrifying. Anything that has like the mental capacity to like stalk you, learn your habits, and massacre your family like that is very, very frightening.
So the most famous stories and eyewitness accounts of the Rake come from a man named Brian Somerville. So he wrote all of this, right? And he has stories that essentially go back to 1964, and I can read them here for you.
Okay.
So this is a suicide note from 1964. As I prepare to take my life, I feel it necessary to assuage any guilt or pain that I've introduced through this act. It is not the fault of anyone other than him. For once I awoke and felt his presence, and once I awoke and saw his form, once again I awoke and heard his voice, and looked into his eyes. I cannot sleep without the fear of what might I awake to next. I cannot ever wake. Goodbye. This message was found in the same wooden box were 2 empty envelopes addressed to William and Rose, and one loose personal letter with no envelope was found. And it said, "Dearest Lenny, I have prayed for you. He spoke your name."
Oh, that's bone chilling, dude.
Isn't it?
Wow. So
So the
essentially, he was being stalked by the Rake.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. That's so scary.
So this one's a journal entry from 1880, translated from Spanish.
Okay.
"I have experienced the greatest terror. I've experienced the greatest terror. I've experienced the greatest terror. I see his eyes when I close mine. They are hollow, black. They saw me and pierced me. His wet hand, I will not sleep. His voice." And then there's unintelligible text.
Oh, wow. So those people are scared beyond coming back from, you know.
Right.
Wow.
This is a mariner's log in 1691. You ready?
Okay.
"He came to me in my sleep. From the foot of my bed I felt a sensation. He took everything. We must return to England. We shall not return here again at the request of the Rake."
So if this is the one that was created on the internet, so is it possible he was before the internet?
Actually, no. So I think what people do is they write these stories, right?
Okay.
To be creative, and they make a narrative for this thing. They make this thing real with these stories, and I think it's actually really kind of cool.
So
They've essentially made their own world with this creature.
But
Yeah?
these journal entries are before, like, he was created on the internet, so are they
Oh, no. So these journal entries were written by that dude named Brian Somerville.
Oh, okay. For a second, I got confused. Sorry, that is my bad.
Yeah, no. These aren't real journal entries.
Okay, I was so confused for a second. Nope, that's my bad.
So there is this journal entry from a witness in 2006, and this one is the most famous one that everyone's heard about.
Okay.
You can find YouTube videos, animated YouTube videos about this, and I'll read it to you. This one is it's scarier than the other ones.
Oh, no.
3 years ago, I had just returned from a trip from Niagara Falls with my family for the 4th of July. We were all very exhausted after a long day of driving, so my husband and I put the kids right to bed and called it a night. At about 4 a.m., I woke up thinking my husband had gotten up to use the restroom. I used this moment to steal back the sheets, only to wake him in the process. I apologized and told him I thought he got out of bed. When he turned to face me, he gasped and pulled his feet up to the end of the bed so quickly his knee almost knocked me out of the bed. He then grabbed me and said nothing. After adjusting to the dark for half a second, I was able to see what caused the strange reaction. At the foot of the bed, sitting and facing away from us, there was what appeared to be a naked man or a large hairless dog of some sort. Its body was positioned disturbing and unnatural, as if it had been hit by a car or something. For some reason, I was not instantly frightened by it, but more concerned as to its condition. At this point, I was somewhat under the assumption that we were supposed to help him. My husband was peering over his arm and his knee tucked into a fetal position, occasionally glancing at me before returning to the creature. In a flurry of motion, the creature scrambled around the side of the bed and then crawled quickly into a flailing sort of motion right along the bed until it was less than a foot away from my husband's face. The creature was completely silent for about 30 seconds. Probably closer to 5, it just seemed like a while. Just looking at my husband. The creature then placed its hand on his knee and ran into the hallway leading to the kids' room. I screamed and ran for the light switch, planning to stop him before he hurt my children. When I got to the hallway, the light from the bedroom was enough to see it crouching and hunched over about 20 feet. He turned around, looked directly at me, and was covered in blood. I flipped the switch on and the light and saw my daughter Clara. The creature had ran down the stairs while my husband and I rushed to help our daughter. She was very badly injured and spoke only once more in her short life. She said, "He is the Rake." My husband drove his car into a lake that night while rushing our daughter to the hospital. He did not survive. Being a small town, news got around pretty quickly. The police were helpful at first, and the local newspaper took a lot of interest as well. However, the story was never published, and the local television news never followed up either. For several months, my son Justin and I stayed in a hotel near my parents' house. After we decided to return home, I began looking for answers myself. I eventually located a man in the next town over who had a similar story. We got into contact and began talking about our experiences. He knew 2 of the other people in New York who had seen the creature and we now referred to as the Rake. It took the 4 of us 2 solid years of hunting on the internet and writing letters to come up with a small collection of what we believed to be accounts of the Rake. None of them gave any details, history, or follow-up. One journal had an entry involving a creature in its first 3 pages and never mentioned it again. The ship's log explained nothing of the encounter, saying it was only that they were told to leave by the Rake. It was the last entry in the log. There were, however, many instances where the creature's visit was one series of visits with the same person. Multiple people also mentioned being spoken to, my daughter included. This led us to wonder if the Rake had visited any of us before our last encounter. I set up a digital recorder near my bed and left it running all night, every night, for 2 weeks. I would tenaciously scan through the sounds of me rolling around in my bed each day when I woke up. By the end of the 2nd week, I was quite used to the occasional sound of sleep while blurring through the recording at 8 times the normal speed. On the first day of the 3rd week, I thought I heard something different. What I found was a shrill voice. It was the Rake. I can't listen to it long enough even to begin to transcribe it. I haven't let anyone listen to it yet. All I know is that I've heard it before and now I believe it has spoke when I was sitting in front of my husband. I don't remember hearing anything at the time, but for some reason, the voice on the recorder immediately brings me back to that moment. The thoughts that must have gone through my daughter's head makes me very upset. I have not seen the Rake since he ruined my life, but I know that he has been in my room while I slept. I know and I fear that one night I'll wake up and see him staring at me.
Ugh.
That's the end of the story.
Ugh, that makes my body... Ooh, I don't like it.
You don't like it?
No. He's scary.
So, yeah, these 2 urban legends they're pretty great. I mean, they actually make you sit there and question what is real and what is not real.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting, even though, like, one legend, was definitely created online.
Yeah.
The other one, what might have been created based off of the sounds that they were hearing in the forest, which, I mean, if you've never heard a mountain lion or a bobcat screaming, it's really scary.
It's terrifying. It's bone-chilling.
And you're just like, oh, that's just a cat. Just don't pet the mean kitty.
Yeah.
So, what do you think about these 2 urban legends?
I definitely think the Rake is scarier just because... it's gross. Like, I cannot stand the thought of something watching me and stalking me. Like, I would rather something scream and come and get me. I don't want to know. Yeah, like something's following
Can you imagine,
me.
like, he's hunched over on all 4s crawling on the side of your house and, like, peeking in your window?
Yeah, that makes me want to, like, live in a teeny tiny box with no windows. Like, that's terrifying.
I'm more disturbed that this thing is walking around looking like a naked man.
Yeah, I don't want to wake up and see that either.
Well, I don't know if I'd be scared or if I would just sit there and be like, this is really fucking awkward now.
Yeah.
I don't know if I know what to do.
Yeah. I don't like and I think it's always very scary to think about that, like, these things come to life, like, by internet lore. Like, we create them. Like,
right. Like, it's to the point where everything is so well written and everybody's just joining in and adding more to the story that it makes it scarier because it makes it more real.
Yeah. It brings it,
and I
brings it to life.
Right. And honestly, like, I don't see any harm in it. I think it, like, makes it more interesting, and some of these people, the way that they write, are so talented.
Oh, absolutely.
I know there is that really famous, like, quote-unquote trail cam picture of the Rake, and, like, it was really nice that was added into it. The more I looked into it, there was so much information about him, right? And, like, so many stories because people just kept adding on to it, just like people did with the White Screamer. I just find it more interesting that the White Screamer has all these variations just because it was word of mouth. It was word of mouth. Like, it wasn't online or anything. And regardless of the internet, like, we all come together to make up these stories.
Absolutely.
Right? And we all come together and we're like, this is what's scary. This is what's happening.
Yeah, it's cool to think that like people blame like the internet for like the lures and people doing bad things because of them, but it's nice to see that this was a thing before the internet. Like it's not just the internet. Like this has been going on for centuries.
Right. And like urban legends are urban legends. Like
Mm-hmm.
they're not really true, but people think that they're true.
Yeah.
And I really think the story of the White Bluff Screamer was just to keep people out of the woods at night, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to go in the woods where there's a mountain lion.
No, and if you have 7 children, especially back in those times, there was so people had a lot of kids, like the big families. Like it was easy just to set them down and be like, "Hey, there's this back there. If you go out there, this is what's gonna happen," and that kept all your kids in line. So,
Right, right. I think, like me and Aubrey's last episode, a lot of these things come out of cautionary tales,
yeah,
which I think is interesting. And now the rake has become a real thing online just for people to come together and like use their writing skills. And they just
mm-hmm.
love spooky things because it is interesting that we all come together and we're like, hey, you know what's really creepy? A tall, pale, bald man
Yeah, that also
that's
might be
naked.
naked.
That like
Yeah, and then they collaborate and use their creativity to, just write stories.
Yeah, I think it's a good way for people to come together, like, especially if you like creepy things. Now,
Mm-hmm.
it is unfortunate that, like, just like in the Slender Man stabbings, like, some people, like,
Mm-hmm.
it really gets to them and it really makes them go crazy.
Yeah, I think you need like have a personal like line that says I can or I can't do this, and if you can't, that's okay. Stay away from it. And if you can, then cool, keep writing stories, but know your line, like know your limits with it for sure.
Right, absolutely. Do you have anything else to add to this before we end this episode?
I don't think so. I think just like if you guys have any more urban legends or creepy cryptids that are your area, definitely send them over. We'd love to talk about them and discuss them and see what they're all about.
Yes, absolutely. So if you like any of this content, please like, subscribe, and follow. We really appreciate every single one. And like I said earlier, we are working on our merch shop. We're working on trying to expand and post more. Um, just keep in mind, Courtney and I do this as like a side hustle, a side hobby. We do have full-time jobs, so it will take us a little bit to get more and better content, but we love doing this and we love hearing from you guys. So thank you so much. We will see you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.